And I'm now delighted to invite to the stage Arnaldo Pangrazzi. Arnaldo is Professor of Pastoral Care and Clinical Pastoral Education at the Camillianum, the International Institute of the Theology of Pastoral Healthcare here in Rome. Some of you will know Arnaldo's work through his many books on aspects of care for the dying and the bereaved, and his beautiful expression of support for those for whom we're caring. Thank you, Arnaldo.
Good morning, everyone. Dobry den, if there are the Ukrainian people present here. Yesterday, I was very touched by the standing ovation attributed to them. For the last 12 years, I've been going every year to Ukraine to impart courses on accompanying the dying, accompanying the bereaved in Lviv, Kiev, Kharkiv, and it's really a source of great indignation to see what has happened there in the last few months. I was in the States for a few years, and I think many years ago, 45 years ago, I was involved in organizing the first conference for the families of suicide survivors, as we had a group in Milwaukee. And in the hospital where I was a chaplain, we started a support groups for parents who lost their children during pregnancy, which is also a particular period of life. I myself, I'm involved quite a bit in accompanying people bereaved, mostly adults. I am a spiritual assistant to an association in southern Italy who accompanies the parents who lost their children, most often adolescents who died in car accidents or different pathologies, especially leukemia, cancer, and also suicide. I've been with them for about 6 years, and so some of the learning, some of the things that I will share have to do a little bit with the bereavement when we lose children, but also adults. We know that the impact with death confronts us with our fragility and mortality. It is a time of reflection, it's a time of humility, meeting death and knowing also the limits of science. So when we talk about grief, we know that everything is affected of our being, our physical part, our mental part, our thoughts, our social dimension, our emotional dimension, and our spiritual dimension, in different ways according to the person, to the context, and the cultures where we live. So when we talk about grief, first the physical dimension, we are affected at the level of our work, of our social roles, professional roles, of our objectives, plans, because there has been an earthquake in our life. We are affected at the level of thinking, our mind, we cannot sleep. Many thoughts go through our mind, memories, concerns, consideration. We are affected at the level of our social context, our relationship, our roles, the costumes of our nation. We are affected at the emotional level, where we experience hurts, feelings, emotions, and we are affected at the spiritual level, in terms of our values, resources, and beliefs, in different ways, according to the loss. And so we could say that grief is a universal response to loss. Divorce also includes the loss of a job, the loss of our house, the loss of our culture, while bereavement is the loss of a person. So the variables, when we talk about bereavement, it depends by the identity of the deceased, it depends by the external support available to us. Thirdly, it depends by our type of relationship with the loved one, and it depends by our inner resources. By far, I consider the most important dimension for being able to recover from a grief experience, our inner resources. But in this reflection, I will focus on the external support, since it talks about the cultural differences. And then it depends also by the causes of death. So it's good for us to keep in mind these different variables that affect our way of, so the identity of disease. So we know, sometimes when we lose our parents, we lose our past, our roots. When we lose our children, we lose our future, because they are our projection into the future. And when we lose a spouse, a friend, companions, a spouse, we lose our present, because these are the people with whom we share our life, our choices, our plans. So the causes of death also is important. So what are the types of death? Sometimes it's anticipated, because there are signs. I work right now in a hospice in Rome, and so I deal a lot with anticipated grief, because people, they are at the sunset of their life. Sometimes it's a dramatic death. The child may die in a car accident because he was involved, or as we see in Ukraine, under the bombs, or unexpected death. Everything was going well, and then something happened, and even the science couldn't save the baby. Secondly, the inner resources. So these are cognitive resources, our mind, our way of looking at things, our psychological resources, the social resources, and the spiritual. There is a variety, a rainbow of possibility that we can utilize in addressing the crisis of life. And the outer resources. So this is the external report. Family, friends, culture, religious belonging, a spiritual path, professional support, work. I only listed them, and in yellow I pointed out culture and religious belonging, because these are the two dimensions that I will develop a little more. So because they are the contents of this meeting, so I will address culture. I have the opportunity also in my own religious order to travel to different countries in Asia, Africa, and so sometimes going is an opportunity also of learning some of this tradition. So when we talk about culture, we see sometimes symbolized by flags, songs, costume, dances. So we could say that the culture includes the way of being, thinking, and behaving of a person or a group, and is influenced by traditions, norms, attitudes, expectation of a society, tribe, or community. So it's a definition of culture that includes a lot. Way of being, thinking, and behaving. It's important, therefore, that we welcome the culture, that we understand or try to understand the culture, to value the culture, to discern the culture, to transform. Because not all culture are good. They are not sacred. Every culture, from Bolivia to Scandinavia to Congo, is a mixture of elements. And so it's important for us to realize that no culture is sacred. Every culture is a mixture of positive and negative elements. So we are children, but not slaves of a culture, because we grew up in a family, in a certain context, so we learn the custom, the tradition. But some of them are unhealthy, and so we need to develop our mind to make discernment and try to change the culture. So every person has the power of influencing and changing the culture. Even before a terminal illness, if the culture says, don't talk about it, we can start in the family to talk about and break that culture, create new culture. So the challenge is to purify and transform cultures, to honor and defend human dignity and promote community growth. So human dignity of each person, but also community growth, two dimensions to try to preserve. So when we talk about death and bereavement, every culture has its own practices and rituals in bereavement. So we are talking especially about parental grief over the loss of a child and the cultural tradition. So the manner of bereavement when a child dies varies and is influenced by expected or unexpected death. The cause, because in some culture, the death of a child is considered God's will. In other, is a fault of the physician. In a third one, is my fault. I made some mistakes, and so forth. It's also influenced by interpretation of death. So the meaning that we attribute to death it has been a tragedy, an injustice, a chastisement. Is it due to superstition? Many interpretations about the death of a child, of an adult. It depends also by the child's age and gender. It's different if the child at 1 or 2 months and if it at 5 years. And so the attachment develops also and influences the bereavement process. Also if it is a boy or a girl in some culture. And also depends by the cultural tradition and practices. I live in a community with people coming from Africa. I'm the only Italian in my community. I have people from Asia, from Africa. And I was talking with them a few days ago, and I noticed, for instance, in the Western world, many of the countries, Italy, for instance, when we lose a child, we grieve a lot. Because Italy, with Spain, is the country in the world with the lowest percentage of births. So it's often the only child in this association that I accompany is the only child, boy or girl, and so it's no future. It's an unending emptiness, tragedy for the family. But in Africa, the elderly are honored. When they lose a child, it's not such a big story, it's not such a strong grief as it is in our countries. And so these are cultural sensitivities. Then it depends also, the saying goodbye to a loved one, by other factors. So the emotional coping, that was also addressed, the social aspects, and the burial practices. So I'm going to address quickly each one of them. We start with the emotional coping. So managing emotions in bereavement. That's the key element, how we manage emotions and feelings. So we can go through the list of the critical emotions that people experience. Sadness is the most intense and the most prolonged. Then there is fear. Sometimes fear of losing another child. Then there is anger before a loss. Then there is depression and there is guilt. Some of the emotions. The culture influences. For instance, I noticed that in Africa, many people have difficulty with sadness, even in my group. I am a clinical supervisor. And when there is sadness, people laugh because it's a mechanism of defense. In other culture, anger is prohibited, is considered unhealthy, inappropriate. And so this judgment complicates the way people manage their losses. So sadness, with other feelings of the same family, loneliness, nostalgia, emptiness, fear with anxiety, uncertainty, anguish, and anger, frustration, resentment, bitterness are variation of the same energy, so to say, and guilt, regret, disappointment, shame. Each one of us may have a more difficulty with one of these emotions, but also the culture, they may have problems with some of those. So coping with emotions, in some cultures, emotions are displayed. For instance, in Middle Eastern countries, in the funerals and during the periods of grief, people weep, cry, they manifest themselves. Sometimes they hire also a group of women to scream, to cry. In other cultures, emotions are discouraged, especially in the countries that are more rational. It seems like an inappropriate way of being, and we need to control it, to repress it. Sometimes many psychosomatic illnesses burn out of that. And in other places, women, or the majority of the country, women often cry when men are silent or get involved in work. The only place I've noticed a difference was in Ethiopia. I was giving a course, there was a funeral, and they invited me. There was a mother being buried, and I assisted the 3 sons. They went to the tomb and started screaming while the sisters were away in the crowd. And so, but it's the exception. In general, women are more free to cry, and men are conditioned in that, sometimes when they are children. And so that complicates their life. Secondly, social aspect. I'm going to talk about some of the rituals, social rituals around dying and bereavement present in every civilization, from Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, to Etruscan civilization. If you go 45 minutes from here, 1 hour, for instance, Tarquinia, near the sea, there are the tombs, and that's the only part of civilization that remain of the Etruscan story. So their tombs, and it's interesting to visit them. There are different cultural narratives of grief, according to the family, according to the tribe, especially in Africa, according to the nation, according to the community that we belong to, and according to the clan. In some countries, there are clan tribes in some continents. And so these are elements to keep in mind. We went through a time, the last 2 years and a half, that has dehumanized dying and grief. There was ritual stripping. Churches, synagogues, temples, pagodas remained closed, and we had to hurry up in bringing the death to cremation or to burial. So there was a time where some images like this reminds us the dehumanization of dying and of grieving, of bereavement. Burial practices, there are some social aspects. For instance, the disposition of the body. In some tradition, like Jewish tradition, Muslim tradition, there are also groups, funeral association in charge of the taking care of the body, or it is the rabbi, using the perfumes, involving them in white clothes. And then there are objects that are placed in the coffin. I see even in the hospice, sometimes flags, if the person, or a flag of the soccer, football team, or there is a rosary, or there is a cross according to the significant elements, or there is the box for the children that we treasure their memories. Then it depends by the announcement of death, the obituaries, what we write them, or what we write in the tombs, also is a way of remembering that person. It depends by the condolences. In every country there is a tradition. We call it condoglianze, in pesame in the Spanish country. Different ways, that a social custom to express nearness to the family. It depends by the funeral vigils. If we go to Central America, in countries like Costa Rica, Guatemala, Panama, they stay up all night to remember, to pray, sometimes to drink. It's a way of celebrating the memory of that person. Also in many African countries, there they also dance, sing. Then the bereavement rules for parents. Here too, there are changes. For instance, in Benin, when a child dies, the mother cannot touch the baby because she is only destined to touch life. The task of taking care of the body of the deceased child belongs to the father. So this is a rule or rules of behavior for surviving parents in different countries. Then the colors in saying goodbye. Here too is an element. In ancient Egypt, the color was red. The dead people were dressed up in red. If we go to Japan, China, India, The colors for the funeral times is white. In Catholic tradition, is purple. So the color is on meaning. Then there is also the removal of objects. If we go in many countries, even in Eastern Europe, they remove mirrors. They remove clocks when the person dies, because it's a way, sometimes superstition, of avoiding that another death may occur in the family. Then it depends, sharing food or funeral banquets. When I was in the States, after a couple of funerals, we went out to have a lunch. So funeral banquets. They are quite often in other cultures, African, Asian, people get together to express support to the family. In some tribes in South America, like in Peru, some people eat a mixture of banana and ashes in order to keep within themselves the spirit of the deceased person. And then it depends by the support to the survivors. In many countries, very often in Africa, when a child dies, or the women stay with the mother of the child 4 days as a way of support, nearness. And then it depends by the bereavement periods. In many countries, the bereavement may last a few days, or we have a memory after a week, after a month, after a year. Depends. The Chinese, they have their own tradition according to the periods of this bereavement. And then it depends by the future relationship with the deceased. For instance, in African countries and Asian countries, the ancestors are honored. There is a little temple in the house where there are the ashes, and people go there and pray. Sometimes when they start the day or before go to bed in the night, they say some prayers. Then we have the places of commemoration that also vary. Sometimes the child stays at home, especially in poor countries. Hospital chapel, according to the mortuaries, funeral homes, and cemetery. Funeral homes has become very important in the last decades. But also the cemetery is a place to remember, to reflect, to meet other parents who lost their children. For instance, in this association they accompany, many people meet in the cemetery. There is like a support groups among the parents, especially the mothers who go there to reflect, to cry, to remember, to pray. Then frequent symbols that we use in different cultures, candles, flowers, incense, flags, photographs that sometimes are placed also in the coffin. And then depends the burial practices. Inhumation in the earth, burial, like in African countries. We lost one of our conference 1 week ago, 33 years old, from Burkina Faso. He died here, and the practices are going on to send the casket to Burkina Faso because they need to bury them in inhumation on the earth. That's their tradition. In tomben, in niches, or locally with a cinerary urn. And thirdly, cremation. Cremation has become very frequent. Used to be the Buddhist and Hinduist countries. Now it has become, especially also with the COVID times, a very frequent opportunity for the people coming from the Buddhist tradition. Is a way of losing the sense of attachment to the body in order to anticipate the reincarnation of the person. The Western tendency, there is a privatization of death. Nowadays, people prefer that the funerals are something, a family business. There is the central role of funeral agency. For instance, we lost the sense of procession, of a company. The family is supporting them. It remains in some villages, no longer in the city. So we went from community to individuality. What I want, what I need, more central than we. And we know the importance of we also in expressing solidarity to Ukraine or other emergencies in the world. And then there are hasty funerals in the city. We have to run. We cannot interfere with the traffic. We go from the funeral home directly to the cemetery. Everything is quick, and there may be consequences of speeding too much the process. People get sick. People come to the hospital a few months after the survivors, and it might be because they repress their emotions. They are unable to cope. Then there is the control of emotion. Be strong. Don't cry. Don't get upset. Don't say that. Don't. We are impeding the liberation of the emotion. And then there are the ashes scattered at the sea, in the gardens, in the forest, in the lakes. It has become, I think, the cemetery needs to be a point of reference. We have problems of family members who kept the ashes in the house. Then first the son wanted it, then the mother reclaimed it. Legal battles because of that. We need common places. When we go, remember, pray, and renew our faith. And then today there is the problem, the reality of virtual immortality. It started September 11, 2011, when there was the tragedy. And so the newspapers start reporting the story of some of the people that died under the Twin Towers. So virtual immortality. The methods are internet, website, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, through blog, profiles of the deceased person, messages that are written, letters. There is a new process that is involved in a lot of people. There are selfies that people take, recorded messages, photos that they send, and they keep alive the person for many years. And so digital death. There are digital cemeteries in constant and unstoppable growth. And we need to reflect on what is the destiny for our digital identities. How long are we going to survive? Because it becomes also a dependency. I have people that I'm accompanying, a mother that keeps changing every day the photo. It becomes a dependency. Her daughter died 5 years ago. She's not getting out because of dependency. Well, the second map, I'll do it quickly. First, the cultural. Second map is the beliefs and religious experience. How am I doing? I have still some time. Many cultures blend culture and religion. It's difficult to differentiate between the two. And so here we need to make a difference between what is spirituality and religious tradition. Usually, religions, they start from above. God, Yahweh, the history, according to the person is Muslim, Hinduist, Buddhist, Christian, according to the tradition, teaching, beliefs, prayers, sacred books, starts from above. While spirituality starts from below, from our human experience, the events that we face, the question that we raise, the search for meaning in the midst of adversity, the relationship that gives sense to our life. Now, the rituals and the religious ceremonies vary according to the religious belonging. So, ritual derives from the Latin ritus and signifies structure. We need a structure. So there is a distinction that we can make between secular rites that are codified by civil society. For instance, praying before the flag that reminds the dead people of a country. So they say secular rites. And then there are religious rites that are codified by the religions. And here we can see a variety of symbols of the major religions in the world. So the benefits of rituals, they allow us to manage grief. Secondly, they express feelings and thoughts through participation in these rituals. Family members, friends are allowed to cry, to share their story, to remember the loved one. We can experience the community support, something that we lost during COVID, in the first few months. Then we have the necessity to speak about the disease, the values that he interpreted, the memories that we keep of that person, even if it is a child, because sometimes they impact more the death when people are young. And then we make public the new state of the survivor. Is a mother who lost the child, is orphan of her child, like it is a widow for someone who loses the spouse. And then we accompany the people in the initial phases of grief and during the significant memorial times. For instance, in the Catholic tradition, we have the anniversary masses, and in every religion there are different ways of remembering the people that we have loved. So just to conclude, something here, some of the elements that is important for us to develop: 3 competency. Cultural competence, try to understand something of that culture. Religious and spiritual competence, it helps us to read, to be informed about that. And then the bereavement competence, some of the things that people go through. Those who are able to integrate some of this competency, certainly they are able to assist and comfort better the bereaved people. The scars tell me where I have been, what I have suffered, but not where I will go, what I will build. This depends on me. Thank you for your attention.